Let me begin by apologizing for the length of this story. When I was 15, my dad passed away. He and my mom weren't particularly close at that time, so while his death hit me hard, my mom didn't seem as affected as one might expect. I decided to join the military at the age of 17, spending my first year away from home. During my absence, my mom remarried, but I didn't really connect with my stepdad. We had different personalities, and he often made snide remarks, telling me to toughen up whenever I was upset about something. Although both of us were at fault for our disagreements, they never escalated too far. After serving for nearly 5 years, I was medically discharged. My mom and stepdad welcomed me back home, assuring me it was a happy reunion. I intended it to be brief, just until I found a job and got back on my feet. I even offered to pay rent, but they declined. However, just 3 days after returning home, my stepdad approached me about contributing to the rent. I was puzzled, but since it was his house, we agreed on an arrangement. Strangely, he never mentioned this to my mom, so I assumed he preferred to keep it between us. I never asked for assistance from them, not out of spite, but because I wanted to be independent. In contrast, my stepdad, who was only slightly older than me, had received substantial financial support from my mom and her husband. They paid for his education, his car, and his living expenses throughout college and beyond. It felt disheartening that he received all this help, while I was immediately asked to pay rent. Despite our age difference, we got along fairly well. The only issue was this disparity in support. After 3 months, I moved out and soon after met a girl I was crazy about. We started dating, and I was ecstatic throughout the relationship. However, I was apprehensive about introducing her to my mom, fearing her judgment. Surprisingly, my worries were unfounded. My mom and my girlfriend got along remarkably well. My girlfriend didn't have much of a family, and my mom and stepdad became like family to her. They bonded so well that they would hang out together, sometimes just the two of them. I was thrilled to see this connection, and my stepdad even liked her, which brought us closer together. A bond I hadn't known I wanted until then. My stepdad had overcome significant challenges in his life. His father had abandoned their family, and he managed to put himself through school, securing a high-paying job on his own. I admired his self-reliance immensely. After a year of dating, I knew I wanted to marry this girl. When I shared my feelings with my mom and stepdad, they seemed genuinely happy. She had already become an integral part of our family, practically one of us. My mom then handed me her engagement ring, a precious heirloom from my dad, which she had kept. The job I had didn't pay much, so I thought, even if it wasn't the ultimate ring, it should always have a special place. I considered it a great placeholder. When I proposed to my girlfriend with the ring, she told me it wasn't just a placeholder. She absolutely loved it. I had never been happier in my life. We started planning our wedding, and to my surprise, my mom and stepdad offered to help with the finances. It was the first time they had offered me financial assistance, and it felt surreal. Fast forward about 3 months, I received a call from my stepdad, and it felt ominous. I went over to their place after work. When I arrived, I saw my mom, stepdad, stepbrother, and my fiancée, who was sitting on the couch, clearly upset. I thought someone had died. I moved to sit next to her, but my stepdad stopped me. He accused me of cheating on her throughout our entire relationship. I was baffled and denied the accusations vehemently. I told everyone there that I never even texted other women I wasn't related to, besides my fiancé. Apparently, some girl had obtained my fiancé's number and claimed that we had been having an affair for over a year. She didn't know I was in a committed relationship. She sent my fiancé screenshots of alleged conversations and details about my life that a stranger shouldn't know. I couldn't grasp what was happening. I was shocked, heartbroken, and furious. My fiancé looked at my phone, confirming I had never sent those messages. Both she and my mother were in tears, and I couldn't hold back my own. My stepdad hurled every insult he could think of at me and forcibly escorted me out of the house. He warned that if he ever saw me on his property again, he'd involve the police. In the following weeks, I tried desperately to contact them, sending calls, texts, voicemails, and messages on every available app. But there was no response. After a month of silence, my stepdad called. instructing me to stop trying to reach my fiancé. He made it clear that I was no longer welcome in their home or around their family. I attempted to call my mother during that time, but she didn't answer either. All I received was a text expressing her sadness and disappointment. My mom didn't have much family, so they usually spent holidays with my stepdad's relatives. They all ostracized me, sharing Christmas photos on Facebook where my ex-fiancé appeared happy and content, which devastated me. The only family member who stood by me was my dad's brother and his family. Even they seemed hesitant around me. The only person who truly believed my innocence was my uncle. I genuinely believe I wouldn't have made it without him. He showed me the kind of fatherly love I had been missing, and I can't express how grateful I am for him. About 6 months after the incident, I decided to move away from the East Coast and settle down in California, needing a fresh start. Less than a year after my move, I received a call from a familiar area code back home, which was rare. I hesitantly answered, and it was my stepbrother on the line. I promptly hung up, feeling a mix of emotions. He called back, and after much internal debate, I answered that night. The conversation was awkward at best. He told me my ex-fiancée had been devastated for a long time. It took her nearly a year to even consider dating again. Meanwhile, I hadn't moved on at all. A few months into her dating attempts, my stepdad encouraged my stepbrother to ask her out. Things seemed all right in the beginning, but they never really clicked. Apparently, my stepbrother confided in my stepdad about this, who, in a fit of misguided advice, told him, "I didn't get rid of my name for nothing. She's a great girl. You need to figure it out with her." I was dumbfounded, quickly replaced by anger. It turned out my stepdad had orchestrated a scheme. He got a girl I didn't know to pose as someone I had an affair with, forging message screenshots and sending them to my ex-fiancée. My stepbrother had been burdened by this information for about a month before he finally revealed the truth to me. He was planning to tell my mom and ex-fiancée the next day. I asked him to hold off on contacting me, giving me time to process everything. That was last Tuesday. I reached out to him recently, telling him I was ready to talk to them, and they could call me tomorrow. I don't know what to say, and I'm uncertain about forgiveness. So far, the only person I've confided in is my uncle, who I asked to keep this to himself. I apologize again for the length of this. My therapist happened to be on vacation, and I needed an outlet. As for the top advice before reading the updates, you're right. My stepfather is toxic, insecure, and narrow-minded. I genuinely appreciate your perspective. I've come to realize that staying no contact with them is the best decision for my well-being. While I might understand why my ex-fiancée believed the false accusations, it doesn't mean I should rebuild any kind of relationship with her. She didn't trust me or give me a chance to prove my innocence. There are plenty of other women out there who won't be easily manipulated or carry the baggage of mistrust. I'm deeply sorry for all the pain this situation has caused, but I acknowledge that my life will be happier without any of them in it. I can see that this is a lot for you to digest, and I'm relieved that the truth has finally come to light. You have every right to take your time in deciding whether you want to rebuild the relationships that were damaged. It's important to remember that you have the option to do what's best for you. I strongly recommend starting therapy as well, as it can be a valuable resource for processing everything you've been through. We would love to hear from you again and support you as you navigate this challenging situation. As for the first update, I apologize for the delay. It's completely understandable given the circumstances. Your stepbrother reached out to you this morning and provided more details about what happened. Apparently, what your stepfather had initially told you wasn't the whole truth. He was careful with his words, seemingly to avoid directly implicating himself, but heavily implying his actions. It's worth noting that your stepbrother is quite astute. He didn't rush to confront your mother and fiancée in a shouting match with his dad. Instead, he took a more thoughtful approach that you might not have considered. He managed to track down a girl who had been in contact with your stepfather, presumably through Tinder. This discovery strongly suggests that your stepfather had been involved in extramarital affairs, which understandably angered you for obvious reasons. The girl admitted that she didn't sleep with your stepfather, but the truth or falsehood of that statement didn't hold much significance for you. What mattered was that your stepbrother talked to her, sharing the story and convincing her to cooperate. It appears that she was well aware of her actions, and the revelation of what happened to you seemed to affect her profoundly. Regardless of her motives, her willingness to cooperate was what counted. She was compensated with $1,000 for making a phone call, and she was given instructions on what to say and provided pictures as evidence. Your stepbrother also offered to pay her again, for the record. She agreed to do it without charge, and it happened just yesterday. My stepfather is away on a business trip until Wednesday, so it was just the four of them there. She came in and spilled everything to my mom and ex-fiancé. My stepbrother mentioned that tears started flowing almost immediately from all three of them after he disclosed everything. He informed them that I was in California and that he would let them know when I was ready to be contacted. To provide some context, here's a bit of backstory to help you understand my mother and ex-fiancé a little better. Please note that this is not an excuse for their actions. It's merely meant to shed light on their behavior. After my dad passed away, my mother and I became incredibly close. We were each other's support system. However, when I turned 16, I started drinking to cope with my emotions. One New Year's Eve, I ended up out with my friends, leaving my mom alone at home. She texted me, expressing her sadness about being by herself. And from that moment, things were never quite the same between us. My mother has always been the type of person who needs someone around. She struggles to handle being alone. When her love for my dad started to fade, I felt the void. Later, when I grew up and moved out, my stepfather filled that void. As for my ex-fiancée, she never had much of a family and had serious trust issues due to her past relationships. Despite her difficult past, she never spoke ill of her ex-boyfriends, except for one who was physically abusive, a clear exception. Despite my own shyness, I've been told I'm cute, particularly by younger girls, although I never liked that label as it didn't feel very masculine. Eventually, I learned to appreciate my features and how easily I blushed. My fiancé, who is nearly 3 years older than me, preferred older girls. I never paid much attention to younger girls who showed interest in me, yet they continued to approach me. This attention bothered my fiancée. She would often question why I wasn't interested in these younger girls or why I didn't leave her for someone younger and more attractive. I'd always found her incredibly attractive, much more so than I ever saw myself, and I constantly reassured her of that. I made it clear that no other girl held any appeal for me. I hope this insight provides some context for why I think they did what they did and believed what they believed. However, this is not an excuse for their actions, and personally, I am not that understanding. At the end of the call with my brother, he mentioned that both my mom and my ex-fiancée wanted to call me today. I agreed, so I waited patiently. Around 3 p.m., I started to feel a bit puzzled. I began to wonder if my brother had made everything up just to mess with me. This thought genuinely worried me. Then, I received a text from him, asking if I was all right. I replied yes and inquired if they were actually planning on calling. He informed me they had been trying for the past few hours. I had blocked both of them when I moved out west, but somehow, I had forgotten to block him. I felt grateful that I hadn't, though. I blocked their calls, and about 10 minutes later, I received a call from my mom. The first thing she said was that I sounded different. I almost hung up right then. It took all I had to just respond with a quiet yeah. She immediately broke down, and I thought I'd feel something more, but the pain of it all just overwhelmed me. She asked if I had received her texts, and I said no. I guess she had been trying to text me over the last year, but I had her number blocked. If she truly wanted to reach me, she could have found a way. It might sound harsh, but I know it's true. I told her I would be willing to rebuild some semblance of a relationship with time, and she seemed content with that. She also informed me that she was removing all her belongings from the house before my stepfather returned and that she would be filing for divorce immediately. I believed her. She might be a poor excuse for a mother in my eyes, but she's never been someone to take half measures. I really wish I could be there to witness that man's face when he comes back to an empty home. Next, my ex-fiancée got on the phone and offered tearful apologies, much like my mom did. I felt something more talking to her. I tried to get her to remember how many times I assured her I would never betray her and how much I loved her. She was beside herself, and honestly, I'm glad we talked. We had about half an hour of conversation, and I even allowed myself to entertain the thought, despite telling myself for over a year that it would never happen, that there could still be something between us. She mentioned she still had the engagement ring, which upset me deeply. I told her to give it to my mom because it no longer belonged to either of us. I could tell this crushed her, and I'll admit, selfishly, I wanted it to. She asked if she could call or text me. I said it's fine, but not to expect a prompt response either way. I essentially gave her the same ultimatum as my mom. I told her that the chances of us having a future relationship were very slim, which was saddening. She understood this as well. I spoke to my brother last, expressing my gratitude for everything he had done. He was helping my mom retrieve her belongings from my stepfather's house, and he apologized for all that had transpired. He informed me that he was going to disclose the entire situation to the rest of the family, with whom I have no connection and don't anticipate communicating with, except for my stepdad's mother, who happens to be the oldest person in either of our families. She had wished me a happy birthday and Merry Christmas over the last year. Perhaps she doesn't care due to her age, or maybe she felt remorse, but I intend to speak with her. I apologize for all the rambling. I'll be flying home for my uncle's 60th birthday in the first week of March. It will be my first time back since I moved out here, and I definitely plan on seeing my brother. While I'm not opposed to seeing my mom and ex-fiancé, I've made it clear to them that I have a lot of healing to do, as do they. If anything further develops, I will provide another update, perhaps after my trip home. For now, this is the last of what I have to share. I haven't been active on social media much in the last year for obvious reasons, and I haven't come across any similar stories to mine that have been referenced in the comments, but I'd appreciate any if you can find them. Thank you to everyone. In the second update, I received a call from a number back home. I had deleted most of my numbers a while ago from anyone I wasn't in touch with. I answered the call, and it was my stepfather. I immediately hung up and blocked the number. After that, I called my mom, fiancé, and brother to make sure they were safe. My mom is staying at a hotel that he doesn't know about, while my fiancé and brother are at their own residences and feel adequately protected. My stepfather has not shown any indications of being a violent man, but it's better to be safe than sorry. My brother told me that he had received a call from him this morning, but he refused to answer. He just informed him about the situation and told him not to contact any of them. I'm not sure how long my stepfather sat there, but he called me around 3 p.m. Pacific time. About an hour ago, I received a message from a different number saying, "We need to talk." I assume it's him, and I haven't responded. That's the latest. In the third update, my stepdad's mother called me. I had her number saved due to the reasons I mentioned earlier. I was a bit concerned that it might have been him trying to gather information, but it wasn't. She's a very kind lady who didn't have to be nice to me in any way, but she showed me compassion. She was very pleasant and wished me well, while also apologizing on behalf of the family. I thanked her and wished her the best as well. It was surprising that this message came from her.